Have you ever wondered about what's behind that fascinating magical shape, the spiral? And you might even be watching one right now as you begin to listen to this file. And maybe you've wondered before just what it is about spirals. How are they constructed? What are all those little things that make a spiral exactly what it is? Why is it such an interesting image to watch? And it can be so pleasurable to look at and focus on, isn't it? And if you've already listened to a few hypnosis files before this one, you've probably already dropped deep into trance, just watching rotating, swirling spirals just like this one now. Or maybe this is the first time you've let your focus be captured and let your mind be drawn in by such a simple, soothing, swirling shape. And it's one we use so often in hypnosis, isn't it? That point of focus to look at, to concentrate on. And I wonder why it seems to work so well to capture people's attention. Why it's such a fascinating image. Because it's such a common hypnotic trope, isn't it? To be so entranced by a spiral. To be transfixed as you watch that mesmerizing curve, winding inwards slowly, hypnotically, and your eyes just seem to follow that constant rotation as it moves towards the center of the screen and disappears at a single point. And it's so strangely compelling, isn't it? The way that movement just keeps swirling, just keeps making your thoughts swirl along with it, drawing you in with a spin till you're almost spellbound. What is a spiral, exactly? Why is it so easy to focus on? In mathematics, we define a spiral as a curve which emanates outward from a single fixed center point, moving further away as it revolves around that point, winding around at a continually increasing distance from that fixed center. And maybe you find it a little confusing and strange hearing that definition now, especially if you're focused on watching a spiral right now that's moving in the opposite direction. But of course, we could just as easily define it the other way, couldn't we? We could say instead that it's a curve which moves gradually inward towards that single central point, winding around at a continually decreasing distance until it reaches that fixed center, that point you're so focused on right now. That's right. And it's such a common shape, isn't it? The spiral. You've probably seen them all over the place, not just in hypnosis, but in nature as well. And they can appear in plants, in certain types of flowers or ferns, the tendrils of vines, and in some creatures like snails or mollusk shells, or even in the horns of some animals. You might have even noticed some spirals in the human form, and if you looked at your own fingertip right now, you'd probably see a spiral right there on the end of your finger, wouldn't you? Where your fingerprint would be formed. And right down on the tiniest level, you could even say that spirals are embedded into our very being, even in the way our DNA is constructed in what's called a double helix shape. which is kind of like a spiral, the way it winds around, the very building blocks of life linked together in such a way that they spiral around each other in that same compelling, twisting shape. And then right at the opposite end of the spectrum, you might see enormous spirals in weather patterns like hurricanes, and even bigger than that in whole galaxies like the Milky Way, where the stars all around us arrange themselves in that same shape, a spiral, one that we all exist inside of, as tiny little parts. Our own bodies themselves made up of millions of DNA spirals, all combining together to create tiny parts inside one great big spiral galaxy stretching out into space. And as well as finding this amazing shape all throughout nature, in both conscious and unconscious forms. And maybe it's even because they exist so often in nature. You might already know that humans have used spirals all throughout history, in art and in architecture. And sometimes they might even take on a sacred significance in the way that they're used. And there are places in Mexico where you can find ancient sacred sites with spiral patterns carved into walls, signifying mystical winds and mysterious serpent-like deities. And there are spirals engraved on Celtic tombs in Ireland as a symbol of the cycle of rebirth, and in other places as well, an ancient sacred mystic symbol of growth and of change and of transformation. And then, of course, spirals appear in all kinds of other architecture too. That special aesthetic quality that's so entrancing to look at and focus. And you've probably seen a spiral staircase before, perhaps somewhere in an old building. Or maybe you're just imagining one right now, standing right at the top of that staircase and looking down. And you can just imagine, can't you, how you'd be able to see that staircase from the top, winding downwards all the way to the ground. And even though it's really a helix shape, looking from the top, it seems like it's shaped just like a spiral, doesn't it? With that visual illusion of the staircase seeming to wind closer and closer to the center, just like a spiral would, curving inwards, with the distance gradually decreasing as it winds towards that fixed central point. And if you were to begin to walk down that staircase, you'd be following along the curve of that spiral as you go further down, wouldn't you? You can just imagine it now. Each step you take, slowly bringing you deeper as you follow that spiral, winding around and around with every rotation that you complete, bringing you right back to almost the same position as where you were before, only just a little deeper down each time. And as you follow each step down, you'd slowly begin to find that it's only an illusion, that spiral shape, that shape you saw right from the very top. It's almost like a visual mystery, because of course you never really move closer to the center, do you? Instead, you only go further and further down, deeper, sinking, never reaching that central point, just going deeper down. That's right. And maybe this aesthetic quality and this familiarity of spirals is why we sometimes use them in hypnosis too, as a way to draw your focus and keep your gaze transfixed. And you might already be transfixed by the spiral in front of you right now, as you focus and listen to my voice, as you're watching the way that it winds and twists into that center. It's drawing you deeper in, isn't it? Deeper down, like that spiral staircase. Down into the imaginary center that almost seems to disappear, just like your thoughts are doing, one by one, as you focus. And it's kind of strange, isn't it? The way spirals appear in so many places. In flowers, and in DNA, and in galaxies, and in art. And it's kind of mysterious, like it's a shape we're drawn to somehow, that all of nature is drawn to instinctively, to keep recreating over and over again. And maybe there's a reason for that. Because there's a scientific principle in biology. The principle of parsimony that says things like to behave in the simplest way possible. And that whatever's the easiest pathway to take, then that's what we'll follow. And if you think about that spiral staircase again, it kind of works that way, doesn't it? It's the simplest way to walk from one floor down to the floor below. And your mind is working that way too right now, isn't it? As your thoughts wind down, just like that spiral, vanishing one by one, until there's nothing left to focus on but the sound of my voice, and that fixed center point, as everything in your head takes up less and less space, and all of your thoughts revolve around that point, getting pulled in deeper and deeper. And it feels good, doesn't it, to have your thoughts take up so little space as they're drawn deeper into that spiral, and to have everything just feel so simple, so easy, no effort, all just revolving around my voice as you follow. And in a moment I'm going to count you down as the curves keep winding around, and your mind gets heavier with every number. 10, drifting downwards. 9, pulling you deeper. 8, closer and closer. 7, in towards that center. 6, feeling so heavy now. 5, all your thoughts fading. 4, until there's almost nothing left. 3, only the sound of my voice. 2, and the curve of the spiral. 1. And drop your mind, falling deep into that center, that vanishing point where all your thoughts have disappeared into nothing. Your mind so beautifully empty as everything that was left fades into the distance. Just like the outside of the spiral is fading at the edges as you focus on that center. And the edges of your thoughts are fading as well, impossible to hold on to anymore. Just blurred and distant. All there is that single point in the center of your vision, your mind as you listen, and my voice holds your focus and nothing else matters now. Empty, mindless, blank. Drop deeper, drop even deeper now, that's right. Feels so good to just stare and drop completely. And it feels so good here, doesn't it? To be so empty and beautifully mindless for me. Just listening to my voice and watching the spiral. And you'll find that every time you listen to my voice, it becomes easier and easier to come back to this deep, empty place that feels so good. And each time you listen, you go deeper. And as you go deeper, it feels even better. And in a moment, I'm going to wake you again. Now that you've learned all these wonderful things about spirals and about how they're used as sacred symbols in art and design and in architecture, and how they're embedded in nature in formations as large as galaxies and as tiny as our own DNA, and how easily you can be drawn to them and their mesmerizing mathematical beauty. And when I wake you, you'll feel wonderfully refreshed from unwinding with this spiral induction and getting ready to wake up now on the count of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and wake. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed our surprisingly scientific spiral study.